Before electricity, humans feared the night, but survival demanded they adapt to endless darkness. Please subscribe my channel. Long before light switches, before power lines stretched across continents, before cities glowed through the night like constellations fallen to earth, darkness ruled the world. When the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the world changed completely. Night was not an inconvenience. It was a force, a boundary, a wall that separated safety from danger, certainty from fear. For most of human history, once the sun went down, life slowed to a fragile flicker. In modern America, we treat darkness like a minor problem. We solve it instantly with a switch. Streets blaze with sodium lamps. Homes glow from every window. Phones light up our faces. But for thousands of years, darkness was not optional. It was absolute. Imagine standing in a small wooden cabin in the year 1600. The sun has just set. Outside, there are no streetlights, no distant car headlights, no glow from a neighboring town. Clouds hide the stars. The forest is a black wall pressing against your door. Inside, your only protection against that black ocean is a small flame. Fire was humanity's first weapon against endless night. Archaeologists believe humans mastered controlled fire at least 400,000 years ago. That discovery did not just change cooking. It changed survival after sunset. In prehistoric camps, the fire pit became the center of the world. It provided warmth, light, protection from predators, and a sense of psychological security. Beyond the circle of flickering light, the darkness felt alive. Eyes could be watching. Teeth could be waiting. For early humans, night amplified every sound. A snapping twig was not background noise. It was a possible threat. The human nervous system evolved in this tension. Even today, many people feel uneasy in complete darkness. That instinct is ancient. As civilizations formed, the battle against darkness became more sophisticated, but it never fully disappeared. In ancient Mesopotamia, oil lamps were carved from stone or clay. A shallow bowl held animal fat or plant oil, with a fiber wick that burned slowly. The flame was weak, smoky, and fragile. It could not illuminate a room the way a modern bulb does. It created pockets of light and deep shadows. In ancient Egypt, torches lined temple walls during rituals. These were not steady beams. They crackled, spat sparks, and filled the air with smoke. Imagine sacred ceremonies performed under trembling light, shadows dancing across carved hieroglyphs. The gods themselves must have seemed closer in that shifting glow. In ancient Rome, wealthy households used oil lamps made of bronze or clay. But even Rome, one of the most advanced cities of its time, was mostly dark after sunset. Streets were dangerous. Crime increased at night. Only a few lantern bearers guided officials or wealthy citizens through the darkness. For the poor, night meant staying home. Medieval Europe was even darker. Most homes had no glass windows, only shutters. Once closed, the house became a sealed box. Candles were expensive. Beeswax candles were a luxury. Tallow candles made from animal fat were cheaper but smelled unpleasant and smoked heavily. A single candle did not brighten a room. It barely softened the blackness. People gathered close to it. Faces glowed. Corners vanished. In colonial America, the situation was similar. Settlers relied on fireplaces as their main source of evening light. The hearth was not decorative. It was survival. Families would sit close to the fire after sunset. They repaired tools, mended clothing, whispered stories, and prepared for sleep. But here is something modern people often misunderstand. Night did not always mean immediate sleep. Before electricity, many societies practiced what historians call segmented sleep. People would fall asleep a few hours after sunset. Then they would wake in the middle of the night for an hour or two. This period was calm and quiet. Some prayed, some read by candlelight, some visited neighbors. Afterward, they returned to bed for a second sleep until dawn. This rhythm matched natural light cycles. Without artificial illumination, the human body followed the sun more closely. But even with this adaptation, productivity was limited. Work that required precision usually stopped after dark. Farming, construction, weaving, writing, and most skilled labor demanded daylight. The night was for rest, reflection, or quiet conversation. Winter made everything harder. In northern regions, winter nights could stretch 14 to 16 hours. That meant long periods confined indoors with minimal light. Cabin fever was not just a metaphor. It was a psychological reality. Families shared tight spaces, conserving fuel and candle supplies. Fuel itself was a constant concern. Firewood had to be chopped, dried, and stored months in advance. Running out during winter could mean freezing. Light and heat were directly connected. Urban areas faced different challenges. In cities like London in the 1700s, organized street lighting began to appear. Oil lamps were installed along major roads, but they were dim, inconsistent, and required workers to manually light them every evening and extinguish them at dawn. Imagine a man walking street to street with a long pole, touching flame to wick after wick as twilight deepens. One missed lamp could leave an entire section in darkness. Even then, most side streets remained pitch black. Crime thrived in shadows. Night watchmen patrolled with lanterns and wooden staffs, calling out the hour to reassure citizens that someone was awake. Their voices echoed through silent streets. Time itself sounded different at night. Sailors understood darkness in another way. At sea, far from land, night could erase the horizon completely. The ocean and sky blended into one black void. Navigation depended on stars. A cloudy night was disorienting and terrifying. For enslaved people in America, darkness held both danger and opportunity. Night could conceal escape attempts. It could hide secret gatherings, but it also brought patrols and violent enforcement. Darkness was never neutral. It carried power. Indigenous tribes across North America developed their own relationships with night. Campfires served as communal anchors. Stories were passed down orally in firelight. The darkness beyond the circle was not always feared. It was respected. It was part of the natural order. Before industrialization, the concept of nightlife barely existed for ordinary people. There were taverns, yes. There were festivals and special celebrations. But regular late-night entertainment was rare because light was expensive and unreliable. Then came whale oil. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, whale oil became a major source of illumination in America. It burned cleaner and brighter than tallow. Cities like New Bedford, Massachusetts grew wealthy from whaling. Street lamps improved. Homes of the upper class glowed more steadily. But this improvement came at a cost. Thousands of whales were hunted to fuel human desire for brighter nights. The ocean paid for urban progress. Gas lighting followed in the early 1800s. Gas lamps transformed major cities. For the first time, entire streets could be illuminated with a relatively steady light. The glow was still yellow and flickering, but it was revolutionary. Shops stayed open later. Theaters extended performances into the evening. Social life began to shift. Still, gaslight required infrastructure. Pipes, maintenance, ignition crews, explosions were not uncommon. Darkness had not been conquered, it had been negotiated with. Throughout all of this, one fact remained constant. The night shaped human behavior. People structured their lives around daylight. Travel was planned carefully to avoid being caught outdoors after dark. Letters were written during the day. Important decisions were discussed while the sun shone. Night carried emotional weight. It was the time of introspection, vulnerability, and imagination. Without artificial brightness, the sky itself was different. Stars were not faint background decorations. They dominated the heavens. The Milky Way was visible to nearly everyone on clear nights. Constellations were practical tools for navigation and storytelling. The cosmos felt close and overwhelming. Today, most Americans live under light pollution. The true night sky is rare. But before electricity, every human being regularly witnessed the universe in full brilliance. Darkness was not empty, it was textured. It had layers, the faint glow of moonlight, the silver edge of clouds, the reflection of firelight in someone's eyes. When we talk about surviving endless darkness, we are not only talking about technology. We are talking about psychology, culture, and adaptation. Humanity did not eliminate the night for most of history. It endured it. It respected it. It built rituals around it. It found meaning inside it. Electricity would eventually shatter that ancient rhythm. It would stretch the day into the night and compress sleep. It would transform cities into glowing grids visible from space. But before that transformation, for thousands of years, every sunset marked a transition into uncertainty. The world shrank to the reach of a flame. And beyond that flame, the darkness waited. As the sun slipped below the horizon in medieval towns and early colonial settlements, a quiet transformation took place. Daytime logic faded. Night belonged to something older. In medieval England and across Europe, most towns were built tightly together. Wooden houses leaned toward each other across narrow lanes. During the day, those streets bustled with merchants, livestock, and children. But after sunset, the same streets became corridors of shadow. There were no glowing storefronts, no electric signs, no illuminated windows guiding the way. If the moon was hidden behind clouds, the darkness could feel almost physical, pressing against walls and doorways. In cities like London, authorities began experimenting with organized street lighting in the 1600s. Oil lamps were hung along main roads, but these were dim and unreliable. A strong wind could extinguish them. Rain could weaken them. Entire neighborhoods would fall into darkness without warning. Most citizens carried small lanterns if they absolutely had to travel at night. The glow barely extended a few feet ahead. Everything beyond that circle remained unknown. Crime thrived in those conditions. Pickpockets, thieves, and gangs understood that night offered cover. Without steady lighting, identifying suspects was nearly impossible. In fact, many cities imposed curfews. Bells would ring to signal that citizens should return home. Being outside after certain hours could invite suspicion. Night watchmen were hired to patrol the streets. They carried staffs and sometimes crude weapons. Their main tool, however, was sound. They called out the hour and announced that all was well. The echo of their voices served as reassurance in the silence. But reassurance did not always mean safety. In colonial American cities like Boston and Philadelphia, the situation was similar. Wooden houses, narrow streets, and minimal lighting created opportunities for arson and theft. Fire was an especially terrifying threat. One stray ember in the night could consume entire blocks before dawn. That is why many colonial towns enforced strict nighttime rules about open flames. Households were expected to extinguish unnecessary candles before bed. Chimneys were checked carefully. Darkness was dangerous, but uncontrolled light could be catastrophic. Beyond crime, night was saturated with superstition. In Europe, centuries of folklore tied darkness to spirits, demons, and witchcraft. The absence of light made imagination stronger. Strange noises were not easily explained. Illnesses and sudden deaths were often blamed on supernatural forces that moved under cover of darkness. During the era of the witch trials, fear intensified. In places like Salem, suspicion could spread rapidly. Nighttime gatherings were sometimes viewed with distrust. Darkness became symbolic of hidden sin or secret rebellion. Religion itself adapted to this reality. Church bells marked the hours not only for timekeeping, but also as spiritual protection. Evening prayers were common across Christian communities. Families gathered before extinguishing candles to ask for protection through the night. Sleep was seen as a vulnerable state. You closed your eyes and surrendered awareness in a world that could not be fully seen. This vulnerability shaped architecture. Beds were often enclosed with curtains. These were not decorative. They helped retain warmth and created a small private enclosure, psychologically separating the sleeper from the open darkness of the room. In some wealthier homes, four-poster beds formed a miniature chamber within the chamber. In rural America, far from town centers, night carried an even deeper isolation. Imagine a small farmhouse on the frontier in the 1700s. After sunset, there were no neighboring lights in sight. Forests stretched endlessly. Wolves, mountain lions, and other predators were real threats in certain regions. The family's safety depended on sturdy doors, a strong fire, and sometimes firearms kept close by. Every sound mattered. A knock at the door after dark was alarming. Visitors typically arrived during daylight. Unexpected movement outside at night could mean danger. Dogs were not just pets, they were early warning systems. For enslaved Africans in the American South, darkness had a different meaning. It could conceal secret religious meetings, known as hush harbors. In forests and hidden clearings, enslaved people gathered quietly to pray and sing beyond the supervision of enslavers. Night became a space of spiritual resistance. At the same time, darkness carried risk. Patrols searched for escapees. Movement after sunset without permission could result in brutal punishment. Night offered hope and fear in equal measure. Indigenous nations across North America also structured life around the natural cycle of light and dark. Unlike European settlers, many tribes viewed night not as evil but as sacred. The sky was alive with meaning. Constellations carried stories passed through generations. The Milky Way was not a distant galaxy. It was a path, a river, a narrative written across the heavens. Because there was no light pollution, the sky itself acted as illumination. On clear nights with a full moon, landscapes could be surprisingly visible. Snow-covered ground in winter reflected moonlight, creating a soft silver glow that allowed limited travel. But moonlight was unreliable. Its cycle dictated visibility. A new moon meant near total darkness. Fear of night influenced law as well. In some early American communities, strict Sabbath rules prohibited unnecessary activity after dark. Moral behavior was closely associated with order and visibility. What happened in darkness was harder to regulate. As cities slowly expanded during the 18th century, taverns and social houses began extending hours. Candles and oil lamps made evening gatherings possible. Yet even in these spaces, lighting was limited. Shadows clung to corners. Faces flickered in uneven brightness. Human interaction felt different under flame light. Conversations were quieter. People leaned closer to hear and see one another. Darkness created intimacy but also suspicion. Even medical understanding was shaped by night. Before modern science, many illnesses were believed to worsen after sunset. The drop in temperature, combined with limited light, made care more difficult. Childbirth at night was particularly dangerous. Midwives relied on candles and experience. One accidental extinguishing of light could complicate an already risky process. Travel between towns was rarely attempted at night unless absolutely necessary. Roads were unpaved and uneven. Without clear visibility, wagons could overturn. Horses could stumble. Bandits sometimes targeted travelers who risked moving after sunset. That is why inns became essential along major routes. Travelers aimed to reach shelter before darkness fully settled. Night also shaped emotion. Letters and diaries from the 17th and 18th centuries often describe nighttime as contemplative. People reflected on mortality, faith, and purpose in the quiet hours between sleeps. With limited external stimulation, the mind turned inward. The absence of artificial brightness amplified internal thoughts. When storms rolled in at night, the experience intensified. Thunder sounded louder. Lightning briefly illuminated entire landscapes, revealing trees bending violently in the wind before plunging everything back into blackness. Without streetlights or electrical hum, natural sounds dominated completely. Owls, insects, distant animal calls wind through wooden beams. Night had a soundtrack. By the late 1700s and early 1800s, as America grew after independence, urban centers gradually expanded public lighting. Whale oil lamps and later gas lamps extended productive hours. Theaters flourished. Political meetings continued after dusk. But even then, darkness was never fully erased. It lingered between lamps in alleys in rural lands beyond city limits. For thousands of years, humanity had structured its fears, beliefs, and behaviors around the certainty that night would come, and that it would bring uncertainty. Electric light would eventually challenge that certainty. But in this era, before widespread electricity, the world still belonged to the sun. When it disappeared, people retreated inward, physically and spiritually. The flame in the window was not just light. It was defiance against the endless dark. By the early 1800s, something extraordinary began to happen in the Western world. For the first time in human history, darkness started losing its absolute power. The Industrial Revolution was not just about factories and machines. It was about time. It was about stretching the usable hours of the day. And nowhere was that transformation more visible than in cities like New York City and Paris. Before this era, most urban centers shut down after sunset. Taverns might stay open for a few extra hours, but large-scale activity faded quickly. Now, fueled by innovation and profit, cities were beginning to glow. The key breakthrough was gas lighting. In the late 1700s, inventors in Britain developed systems to produce gas from coal and distribute it through underground pipes. By the early 1800s, gas lamps began appearing along major streets. Instead of isolated oil lamps that required constant refilling, entire networks could supply rows of streetlights at once. The effect was dramatic. Main avenues that had once been corridors of shadow became illuminated paths. The light was not white like modern electricity. It was yellow and flickering, but it was steady enough to push darkness farther back than ever before. In London, gas lighting spread quickly. By the 1820s and 1830s, thousands of lamps lined the streets. Night was no longer total blackness. People could walk with greater confidence. Businesses extended their hours. The city's rhythm began to change. Paris embraced gaslight so enthusiastically that it earned the nickname the City of Light long before electric bulbs existed. Boulevards glowed under rows of lamps. Cafes remained open late into the evening. Theaters flourished. Music drifted through illuminated streets. Night was becoming social. Across the Atlantic, New York City followed closely behind. Gas companies formed to supply fuel for both homes and public spaces. By the mid-1800s, Broadway was bright enough to attract evening crowds. Shopping after sunset became possible for the growing middle class. For the first time, the average citizen could experience something new, nightlife as routine rather than rare. But the transformation was not purely glamorous. Factories also took advantage of artificial light. Industrialists realized that machines did not need to rest when the sun went down. Workers could labor in shifts. 12-hour days expanded. In some cases, they stretched even longer. Artificial light increased productivity, but it also reshaped human biology. For thousands of years, sleep patterns had aligned with natural cycles. Now, factory bells dictated schedules. Workers rose before dawn and sometimes returned home long after sunset. Gas lamps inside textile mills and metal workshops allowed production deep into the night. Children worked under those lights. Women stitched garments in dim factory glow. The extension of daylight was not always liberation. It was often exploitation. Gas lighting also carried danger. Coal gas was volatile. Leaks could fill rooms silently. Explosions were not uncommon. Fires broke out in homes and businesses. Cities that were trying to escape the fear of darkness discovered new risks in the brightness they created. Still, the cultural shift was unstoppable. Restaurants began advertising evening dining. Concert halls scheduled later performances. Political rallies continued past dusk. The simple act of walking at night became less terrifying in central districts. Police forces adapted as well. Instead of relying solely on night watchmen calling out the hour, organized patrol units operated under improved visibility. Crime did not disappear, but criminals lost some of their advantage. Urban planners recognized something profound. Light influenced behavior. Well-lit areas attracted commerce and crowds. Dark alleys remained dangerous. The contrast between illuminated boulevards and shadowed backstreets became symbolic of wealth and poverty. In rural America, however, life remained largely unchanged. Outside major cities, farms still depended on oil lamps, candles, and fireplaces. The countryside after sunset remained deeply dark. A farmer in Ohio or Kentucky in 1850 would experience night much like his ancestors had. The Milky Way still dominated the sky. Silence still settled heavily over fields. The gap between urban and rural night widened. Culturally, night began to gain a new identity. Romantic writers and poets of the 19th century described gaslit streets as mysterious and beautiful. Artists painted cityscapes glowing softly under artificial illumination. Darkness was no longer only fear. It became atmosphere. At the same time, moral debates intensified. Some critics argued that extending activity into the night encouraged vice. Gambling halls, dance houses, and brothels operated more easily under artificial light. The idea that nighttime should be reserved for rest and prayer began to weaken. Time itself felt different. Before widespread lighting, sunset was a clear boundary. Now that boundary blurred. Evening could stretch indefinitely. Clocks mattered more than the position of the sun. Industrial society was no longer synchronized strictly with nature. Meanwhile, technological competition intensified. Gaslight was powerful, but it was not perfect. It required infrastructure, constant maintenance, and produced soot. The search for something brighter and safer continued. Inventors across Europe and America experimented with electric arcs and early forms of incandescent light. Public demonstrations stunned audiences. When electric arc lamps were first displayed in the mid-1800s, crowds gathered in amazement at their intense brightness. It was a glimpse of the future. In 1879, Thomas Edison successfully demonstrated a practical incandescent light bulb. His system was not just a bulb. It was an entire electrical network designed to power homes and businesses. When electric lighting began replacing gas in major cities, the change felt almost supernatural. Electric light did not flicker the same way. It did not produce open flames. It burned cleaner and brighter. Entire streets could be illuminated with unprecedented intensity. The psychological effect was profound. Shadows shrank, corners became visible, night felt less threatening in central urban areas. Businesses stayed open later than ever. Factories expanded night shifts even further. The boundary between day and night began dissolving. But even in this new era, electricity did not immediately reach everyone. In the late 19th century, large cities like Chicago and Boston adopted electric lighting in stages. Wealthy districts were prioritized. Poorer neighborhoods often remained dependent on gas or oil for years. Rural America would wait decades. The Industrial Revolution did more than brighten streets. It redefined human expectation. People began to assume that darkness could be controlled. That night was no longer sovereign. Yet beyond city limits, the ancient pattern persisted. Farmers still rose with the sun. Small towns still dimmed after dusk. Stars still burned clearly above open fields. The conquest of darkness was uneven. But momentum had shifted. For the first time in history, humanity was not merely surviving the night. It was reshaping it. The endless darkness that once dictated fear, prayer, and retreat was slowly becoming negotiable. And as electric grids expanded, the transformation would accelerate beyond anything previous generations could imagine. When electric light first appeared in American cities, it did not arrive quietly. It arrived like a spectacle. Crowds gathered in streets to witness entire blocks illuminated at the flip of a switch. People shielded their eyes. Some cheered. Others stared in disbelief. For generations, flame had been the only reliable defense against night. Now light appeared without smoke, without wick, without open fire. It felt like magic. In 1882, Thomas Edison launched one of the first central power stations in New York City. The Pearl Street station powered dozens of buildings in lower Manhattan. It was small by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. Instead of each home relying on its own fuel source, electricity flowed through wires from a central location. The idea of a power grid was born. Other innovators, including Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse, pushed the technology even further. They promoted alternating current systems that could transmit electricity over longer distances. This allowed power to reach beyond dense city centers. What followed was often called the War of Currents, a fierce competition over how America would be electrified. But behind the technical battle was something larger. It was a struggle over who would control the future of night. By the 1890s, electric streetlights began replacing gas lamps in major cities. Downtown districts became brighter than anything seen before. Storefronts glowed with large display windows. Theaters used electric spotlights to dazzle audiences. Hotels installed chandeliers that shimmered without flame. Night transformed into an economic opportunity. Shoppers no longer rushed home at sunset. Department stores extended hours. Factories ran around the clock. Newspapers printed late editions. Restaurants marketed evening dining as fashionable. In cities like Chicago and Philadelphia, electric light became a symbol of progress. Municipal leaders competed to install brighter systems. World's fairs showcased dazzling displays of electric illumination to prove modern superiority. When the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition lit up Chicago with thousands of electric bulbs, visitors described it as otherworldly. Entire buildings glowed white against the night sky. The future no longer belonged to darkness. Yet while cities embraced electricity, much of America remained unchanged. At the start of the 20th century, millions of rural families still relied on kerosene lamps. Farms were scattered across vast distances. Running power lines to isolated homes was expensive and unprofitable for private companies. So the countryside stayed dark. A farmer in Kansas in 1910 might read by the same dim oil lamp his grandparents used. He might step outside at night and see a sky blazing with stars, untouched by light pollution. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, electric signs flickered over crowded streets. The divide between urban and rural life deepened. Electric light did more than extend business hours. It reshaped sleep. For centuries, people went to bed relatively soon after sunset. Even with gaslight, illumination was limited and costly, but electric bulbs were brighter, cleaner, and increasingly affordable. Families stayed awake longer. Children studied after dinner. Entertainment expanded into the evening. By the 1920s, radio entered American homes. Evening programming encouraged listeners to remain awake for scheduled broadcasts. Later, television would intensify this shift even further. The natural rhythm of segmented sleep faded. Instead of first sleep and second sleep, people consolidated their rest into a single block. They stayed awake later, often under bright artificial light, and woke earlier for industrial schedules. Biological clocks began to drift from the sun's pattern. Scientists would later discover that artificial light suppresses melatonin, the hormone that signals the body to sleep. But in the early 20th century, few understood the physiological consequences. Light meant freedom. That was enough. Electricity also improved safety in some ways. Streetlights reduced certain types of crime in commercial districts. Emergency services operated more effectively with better visibility. Hospitals used electric lighting in surgical rooms, increasing precision and reducing reliance on daylight. But new problems emerged. Factories operating night shifts created exhaustion. Workers commuting before sunrise and after sunset rarely saw daylight in winter months. Urban neighborhoods flooded with constant light lost the natural darkness that once signaled rest. Cities began glowing all night long. The skyline of New York City became a symbol of relentless activity. Skyscraper windows sparkled after midnight. Times Square blazed with electric advertisements, turning night into spectacle. Meanwhile, in small towns across America, electrification arrived slowly. It was not until the 1930s, during the Great Depression, that the federal government intervened. The Rural Electrification Act of 1936 provided funding to bring power lines to remote communities. Poles were planted across fields, wires stretched between farms. For many rural families, the first electric bulb in their home was unforgettable. Elderly residents later recalled flipping a switch for the first time and watching their kitchen flood with steady white light. No more trimming wicks. No more cleaning soot from glass chimneys. No more rationing lamp oil. Night changed in an instant. Refrigerators replaced ice boxes. Electric pumps replaced manual wells. Radios connected isolated families to national news. The countryside stepped into the modern age. But something else quietly disappeared. True darkness became rare. As power grids expanded across the United States, fewer people experienced nights illuminated only by moonlight and stars. Urban glow spread outward. The Milky Way faded from view in growing regions. Humanity had conquered darkness, but in doing so, it altered its relationship with the sky. By the mid-20th century, America had become a 24-hour society. Factories, hospitals, transportation systems, and entertainment industries operated continuously. Night was no longer a boundary. It was another shift. Airports blazed with runway lights. Highways glowed under sodium lamps. Suburbs shimmered softly even after midnight. The phrase "city that never sleeps" became reality. Electric light extended productivity, safety, and convenience. It allowed medical breakthroughs, global communication, and economic growth. But it also blurred the ancient line between day and night that had shaped human biology for thousands of years. For most of human history, sunset meant retreat. Now it meant continuation. Darkness had not vanished entirely. It lingered in remote deserts, deep forests, and high mountains. But for the majority of Americans, night was no longer endless. It was illuminated. And as the 20th century progressed, the glow only intensified. By the early 20th century, America no longer feared the night the way its ancestors had. Instead of retreating indoors after sunset, people stepped out into it. Electricity had done more than brighten streets. It had transformed culture itself. In the 1920s, cities pulsed with energy after dark. Jazz drifted through illuminated neighborhoods. Movie theaters filled with crowds seeking escape under glowing marquees. Neon signs began appearing above storefronts, their bright colors cutting through the darkness like something from the future. Times Square in New York City became a symbol of this new world. Towering electric billboards flashed advertisements high above the street. The night sky there was no longer black. It was electric blue and crimson, constantly shifting. Night had become entertainment. The rise of Las Vegas pushed this transformation even further. In the middle of the desert, casinos and hotels turned darkness into spectacle. Massive neon displays glowed against the empty landscape. Visitors arrived specifically to experience a place where the lights never dimmed. The city's identity depended on defying night. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, The film industry used powerful electric lighting to create artificial daylight inside studios. Hollywood productions no longer relied entirely on natural sun. Scenes could be shot at any hour. Entire worlds were constructed under blazing lamps. The invention of motion pictures and later television meant that people could sit indoors at night, staring into glowing screens. First radios, then black and white televisions, and eventually color broadcasts filled living rooms with flickering light. Evening became prime time. Families reorganized their routines around scheduled shows. Dinner moved earlier or later depending on programming. Children begged to stay awake just a little longer. The natural signal of darkness no longer determined bedtime. Entertainment did. Nightlife expanded beyond theaters and casinos. Dance halls, clubs, and late-night diners flourished in urban areas. Shift workers finished factory jobs at midnight and sought food and company under fluorescent lights. The phrase 24-hour city entered the American vocabulary. But this constant illumination came with hidden consequences. As more Americans stayed awake deeper into the night, sleep patterns shifted dramatically. Instead of the long rest that rural ancestors once experienced, urban populations averaged fewer hours of sleep. Artificial light tricked the brain into thinking it was still daytime. Doctors began noticing rising complaints of insomnia. In earlier centuries, sleeplessness was often temporary and tied to anxiety or illness. Now it became widespread. Electric lamps beside beds allowed people to read late into the night. Office work spilled into evening hours. Factories operated in rotating shifts that forced workers to sleep during daylight. The biological clock, once synchronized with sunrise and sunset, struggled to adapt. By the mid-20th century, fluorescent lighting spread into offices, schools, and hospitals. It was bright, efficient, and harsh. Night shifts became more common in healthcare, manufacturing, and transportation. Hospitals in cities like Chicago and Boston functioned continuously. Emergency rooms never closed. Artificial lighting allowed surgeons to operate at 3 a.m. as clearly as at noon. This saved lives, but it also normalized the idea that human activity no longer required darkness for rest. Meanwhile, suburban America embraced porch lights and street lamps. Entire neighborhoods glowed softly until dawn. Children growing up in the 1950s and 1960s often never experienced complete darkness outside their homes. The stars faded quietly from everyday life. Astronomers began raising concerns about light pollution. Observatories moved farther from cities to escape the glow. The once common sight of the Milky Way became rare in urban areas. For thousands of years, every human being had looked up at a sky filled with countless stars. Now millions of Americans could see only a handful. Psychologically, something subtle shifted. Darkness had once forced reflection. Evenings were quieter, slower. Conversations revolved around storytelling, prayer, or simple companionship by firelight. Electric illumination replaced that intimacy with stimulation. Instead of listening to wind and insects, people listened to broadcasts and traffic. Instead of gazing at stars, they watched screens. Yet not everyone welcomed this change without question. Writers and thinkers in the early 20th century warned that constant light might disconnect humanity from nature. They argued that endless productivity eroded balance, but progress was difficult to resist. Electricity represented modernity, success, and power. World War II accelerated the transformation. Factories operated non-stop to produce equipment. Cities practiced blackout drills to avoid enemy detection, briefly reintroducing Americans to genuine darkness. For a moment, people remembered what night once felt like when streetlights were extinguished. After the war, however, illumination returned stronger than ever. Highways expanded across the nation, lined with bright lamps. Air travel increased, with airports operating through the night. Motels advertised vacancy with glowing signs visible from miles away. By the 1970s and 1980s, shopping malls stayed open into the evening. Fast food chains operated 24 hours in major cities. The idea that anything could be accessed at any time became part of American identity. Electric light had not just conquered darkness, it had redefined time. The final transformation arrived with computers and the internet. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, digital screens became constant companions. Smartphones illuminated faces in dark bedrooms. Social media and streaming platforms erased any remaining boundary between day and night. A person could lie in bed at 2 a.m., scrolling endlessly under a blue glow. The ancient relationship between human beings and sunset was almost completely severed. And yet, despite all this brightness, a quiet longing remains. National parks in places like Grand Canyon National Park and Big Bend National Park attract visitors seeking dark sky experiences. People travel miles away from cities to see stars clearly again. There is something deeply human about wanting true night. Before electricity, darkness shaped survival, belief, architecture, and sleep. After electricity, it became optional in many places, but our bodies and minds still carry the imprint of those ancient cycles. We evolved under firelight and starlight. Today, the glow of cities can be seen from space. Satellites capture images of North America shining brightly against the blackness of Earth's shadow. The continent looks alive at night. It is a symbol of power, but it is also a reminder of what has been lost. Endless darkness once defined human limits. It forced rest, caution, and community. Modern illumination offers convenience, safety, and opportunity. The question is not whether electricity improved life. It clearly did. The deeper question is what happens when night no longer feels like night at all. For most of human history, darkness was not an enemy of the body. It was a signal. When the sun disappeared, the human brain responded automatically. Deep inside the skull, a small structure called the pineal gland began releasing melatonin. This hormone prepared the body for sleep. Heart rate slowed. Body temperature dropped slightly. Muscles relaxed. Thoughts softened. Darkness was biology. Before electric light, this process happened naturally and consistently. Firelight and candlelight were dim compared to modern bulbs. They did not overpower the brain's ability to recognize night. Even gaslight, though brighter, was still relatively weak compared to today's illumination. But electricity changed that signal completely. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, scientists began noticing subtle changes in sleep patterns. People in electrified cities reported going to bed later than those in rural areas. They also reported waking up feeling less rested. At first, few connected this to light itself. By the mid-20th century, research into circadian rhythms began expanding. Scientists discovered that the human body operates on an internal 24-hour clock, influenced primarily by light exposure. The presence of bright light, especially blue wavelengths, tells the brain it is daytime. Electric bulbs, fluorescent lights, and eventually LED screens emit strong blue light. This means that when someone sits under bright lighting at 10 p.m., their brain may interpret it as late afternoon. Melatonin production is delayed. Sleep becomes lighter and shorter. For thousands of years, sunset naturally triggered rest. Now, artificial brightness interrupts that ancient cycle. In cities like New York City and Los Angeles, true darkness is rare. Streetlights shine through curtains. Billboards glow above highways. Apartment windows remain illuminated deep into the night. Even bedrooms are no longer fully dark. Digital clocks emit light. Phones rest on nightstands. Televisions blink softly in standby mode. The body never fully experiences night. Researchers at universities across the United States began linking chronic light exposure to sleep disorders. Insomnia rates rose steadily throughout the 20th century. Shift workers, especially nurses, factory employees, and emergency responders, showed higher risks of fatigue-related illnesses. Hospitals in Chicago and Boston conducted long-term studies on night shift workers. They found increased rates of cardiovascular problems, metabolic disorders, and mood disturbances. The reason was simple but profound. Humans evolved under predictable cycles of light and dark. Artificial illumination disrupted that rhythm. Darkness once acted as a universal pause button. Now, that pause is optional. Mental health professionals also began noticing correlations between artificial light and anxiety. Constant stimulation from screens and bright environments kept the nervous system active longer than nature intended. Instead of winding down slowly under dim firelight, modern humans often jump from intense digital interaction directly into bed. The mind struggles to slow itself. Before electricity, nighttime sounds were limited. Wind, insects, distant animals, the crackle of a hearth. Silence was common. Today, cities hum constantly. Traffic flows through illuminated streets. Neon signs buzz faintly. Electronic devices emit background noise. Darkness once meant sensory reduction. Now it often means continued stimulation. Another unexpected consequence of electric light is the loss of star visibility. For ancient civilizations, the night sky was a calendar, a compass, and a storybook. Farmers timed planting seasons by constellations. Sailors navigated by Polaris. Entire mythologies formed around the movement of stars. In rural America, before widespread electrification, children grew up recognizing constellations as easily as street names. But in heavily lit urban regions, only the brightest stars remain visible. Astronomers increasingly move telescopes to remote areas like Mauna Kea to escape light pollution. The glow from major metropolitan areas spreads for miles, creating a halo that dims the sky. The psychological impact of this loss is subtle but significant. Seeing a star-filled sky reminds humans of scale. It creates perspective. It fosters awe. Studies show that experiences of awe can reduce stress and increase feelings of connectedness. Without regular exposure to natural darkness, many people miss that emotional reset. Artificial brightness also affects wildlife. Insects are drawn to streetlights, disrupting natural ecosystems. Birds that migrate at night become disoriented by illuminated skyscrapers. Sea turtles mistake coastal lights for the moon and crawl in the wrong direction after hatching. The conquest of darkness extends beyond humans. Yet, despite all these consequences, electric light remains one of humanity's greatest achievements. It reduces accidents. It enables emergency care. It allows students to study after sunset. It supports global communication and economic growth. The issue is not light itself. It is excess and imbalance. In recent years, a quiet movement has emerged promoting dark sky preservation. Certain towns adopt lighting regulations to reduce unnecessary brightness. Outdoor lamps are shielded and directed downward. Warmer colored bulbs are encouraged to minimize blue light exposure. National parks such as Grand Canyon National Park offer night sky programs, inviting visitors to rediscover the Milky Way. People often react with shock when they see thousands of stars for the first time. It feels ancient, familiar, almost forgotten. Modern sleep experts now recommend dimming lights in the evening, reducing screen exposure before bed, and recreating a sense of natural twilight indoors. The goal is not to return to candlelit cabins, but to respect the biological systems shaped over millennia. In many ways, humanity's relationship with darkness has come full circle. We once feared it because it limited visibility and safety. Then we conquered it with electricity. Now we are learning that total elimination of darkness carries its own risks. The endless night that once defined survival has become something rare and even desirable in certain contexts. Darkness is not just the absence of light. It is a biological requirement. It is a psychological reset. It is a cosmic reminder. For most of history, humans survived endless darkness by adapting to it. Today, we are adapting again, this time to endless light. And the balance between the two may determine how healthy future generations will be. In the 21st century, something unexpected began happening in America. After more than 100 years of expanding brightness, some people started turning the lights off on purpose. Not because they lacked electricity, but because they wanted darkness back. In major cities like New York City, where skyscrapers glow through the night and traffic never truly stops, a growing number of residents began speaking about burnout. They described feeling overstimulated, constantly alert, unable to disconnect. Bedrooms were lit by phone screens. Notifications flashed past midnight. Sleep felt shallow. So they began experimenting. Some installed blackout curtains to block streetlights. Others removed televisions from bedrooms. Blue light filters became popular on smartphones. The goal was simple: recreate night inside a world that refused to go dark. At the same time, another movement gained traction far from the city: off-grid living. In rural states like Montana, Idaho, and parts of Texas, families chose to build homes powered by solar panels and battery systems, limiting artificial lighting after certain hours. Some intentionally reduced nighttime brightness to match sunset cycles. They reported deeper sleep, quieter evenings, and stronger awareness of the natural world. For them, darkness was not inconvenience, it was restoration. National parks became sanctuaries for modern Americans seeking true night. In places like Big Bend National Park and Death Valley National Park, the sky explodes with stars after sunset. Visitors often describe the experience as overwhelming. Without city glow, the Milky Way stretches clearly from horizon to horizon. Many first-time visitors admit they had never seen so many stars. Astronomy clubs across the country organize night sky events. Families bring blankets and telescopes. Children learn constellations once known by nearly every human being. The sky, once taken for granted, becomes an attraction again. Meanwhile, digital detox retreats emerged as a cultural response to endless light and stimulation. In remote lodges and forest camps, guests surrender their phones upon arrival. Outdoor lighting is minimal. Evenings are spent around campfires, much like early human gatherings. Conversations slow down, faces glow in firelight, silence returns. Participants often report that the first night feels uncomfortable. Without screens, the mind races. But by the second or third night, something shifts. Sleep deepens. Anxiety decreases. The body remembers its older rhythm. Medical research continues to confirm what ancient humans knew instinctively. Darkness signals recovery. It tells the nervous system to stand down. Urban planners are also rethinking illumination. Some cities have begun adopting warmer LED streetlights to reduce harsh blue tones. In neighborhoods concerned about light pollution, shielded fixtures aim light downward instead of outward into the sky. Communities near observatories, such as those around Kitt Peak National Observatory, enforce strict lighting codes to preserve visibility of the stars. Residents use low-intensity bulbs and minimize unnecessary outdoor lighting. The night sky becomes a shared resource worth protecting. Even the wellness industry has embraced darkness. Sleep masks are marketed not just as travel accessories but as nightly essentials. Bedrooms are redesigned with dimmable lamps. Apps track sleep cycles and encourage reduced screen exposure before bed. Ironically, technology now attempts to solve the problems created by technology. The rise of mindfulness practices also reflects a desire to slow down after sunset. Meditation sessions are often scheduled in the evening under low light. Candlelit yoga classes intentionally mimic pre-electric environments. The flicker of flame feels calming because it connects to something ancient in the brain. At the same time, American culture still celebrates brightness. Cities like Las Vegas continue to thrive on spectacle. Stadiums blaze under powerful floodlights. Late-night television broadcasts across time zones. Online platforms stream endlessly. The tension between endless light and necessary darkness defines modern life. You can see it in suburban neighborhoods at midnight. Some houses glow from every window. Others are completely dark. Within the same street, two philosophies exist. One embracing constant illumination, the other protecting quiet. You can see it in workplaces. Some companies encourage late-night productivity. Others promote strict boundaries and digital curfews. You can even see it in architecture. Modern homes often feature massive windows and bright interior lighting. Yet there is also a trend toward cozy, low-light spaces designed for relaxation. Humanity is negotiating with night again. But this time, the negotiation is voluntary. For prehistoric ancestors, darkness was unavoidable. For medieval families, it was inevitable. For industrial workers, it was gradually pushed aside. Today, it is optional. And that choice changes everything. When someone decides to turn off their phone at 9 p.m., they are reclaiming something ancient. When a family sits outside without porch lights, watching the moon rise, they are reconnecting with rhythms older than cities. The endless darkness that once defined survival is no longer a threat in most of America. It is a rarity. And perhaps that is why it feels powerful. In the quietest corners of the country, away from highways and skylines, night still falls the way it always has. The air cools. Crickets begin their chorus. Stars ignite overhead. The horizon disappears into shadow. In those places, the world feels vast again. For thousands of years, humans survived endless darkness by adapting their bodies, beliefs, and communities around it. Then they transformed the night with fire, gas, and electricity. Now, in an age of constant illumination, some are choosing to remember what it meant to let darkness return. Because sometimes, survival is not about conquering the night. It is about learning when to welcome it back. As the 21st century advances, humanity is entering a new chapter in its relationship with night. We no longer merely conquer darkness with fire, gas, or electricity. Now, technology promises to control it completely, in ways previous generations could never have imagined. Smart cities are at the forefront of this transformation. In places like Singapore and Los Angeles, streetlights adapt automatically to traffic and weather, dimming when no one is around and brightening when activity increases. Sensors detect pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles, creating a dynamic glow that responds in real time. Night is no longer static. It is programmable. Artificial intelligence monitors urban illumination patterns, optimizing for safety, energy efficiency, and aesthetics. Algorithms decide how much light a park needs or how bright a pedestrian crosswalk should be. Humans rarely intervene. Cities can essentially think about night, deciding when darkness is allowed and when brightness dominates. Yet this raises new questions. In a world where every street can be lit perfectly, where every building glows on command, will the night sky ever be visible again to most people? Already, satellites capture images showing North America and Europe shining brilliantly from orbit, a patchwork of urban glow stretching across continents. True darkness is rare. It is confined to deserts, remote mountains, and specially designated dark sky preserves. Space exploration adds another layer. On the International Space Station and future colonies on the Moon or Mars, night behaves differently. The sun rises and sets at unfamiliar intervals. There is no familiar horizon. Artificial lighting is mandatory. Astronauts experience synthetic night, cycles of illumination created by engineers, not the sun. For humans venturing beyond Earth, darkness becomes a construct, something we control entirely. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence expands our interaction with night on Earth itself. Smart homes adjust lighting based on circadian rhythms. Bedtime lights dim gradually. Morning simulations brighten the room to mimic sunrise. Yet while these systems support health, they also illustrate how disconnected humans have become from natural darkness. Night is no longer experienced organically. It is managed. The psychological consequences are profound. Studies reveal that excessive nighttime illumination contributes to stress, sleep disorders, and even depression. While humans are adapted to a natural cycle of light and dark spanning millennia, our modern environment provides almost constant brightness. Even in bedrooms, streetlights, digital devices, and security systems reduce exposure to genuine darkness. In some ways, the struggle with night has come full circle. Once, humans feared the dark because it brought danger and uncertainty. Then, electricity allowed us to banish it, creating comfort and productivity. Now, in a hyperconnected and illuminated world, darkness is scarce, but the human body still craves it. Some communities are responding. Nighttime conservation efforts aim to limit artificial light. Certain neighborhoods implement curfews on exterior lighting. Universities experiment with dark dormitories, where students are encouraged to avoid screens and lights before bed. Even in a hyperlit, always-on society, people are rediscovering the value of shadow and quiet. The contrast between city and wilderness has never been sharper. In the heart of Tokyo, neon dominates every street corner. Advertisements flicker endlessly. Pedestrians navigate glowing sidewalks. But just a few hours drive outside the metropolis, the sky reveals thousands of stars, untouched by human brilliance. For those accustomed to city light, the sight can be overwhelming, almost alien. Space itself offers a stark reminder of what humanity has gained and lost. On Earth, no place is truly free from light pollution except remote zones and international agreements protecting observatories. In orbit, astronauts see continents shining like giant circuit boards. From above, the night is entirely human-made. Darkness is optional. Or perhaps more accurately, it is a resource we rarely leave untouched. The future of night may be even stranger. Autonomous vehicles with adaptive headlights, drones that illuminate cityscapes from above, virtual reality environments that simulate artificial dusk and dawn. All these tools can further redefine human perception of day and night. Night may no longer have a fixed meaning. It may become an experience that is crafted, scheduled, and sold. Yet some humans still seek the original night, the kind that shaped our evolution. Dark sky reserves, off-grid communities, wilderness retreats, these are not just nostalgic experiments. They are a return to biology, a reminder that for thousands of years, humans lived by cycles dictated by the sun and moon. Even as technology advances, the need for natural darkness persists. In the end, the story of night is a story of adaptation. Humans survived endless darkness for millennia by learning its rhythms, respecting its boundaries, and finding safety within it. Then we illuminated it, extending productivity, comfort, and culture. Now we navigate a world where night is optional, yet our bodies and minds remain tethered to ancient patterns. The question facing the next century is profound. In a world where artificial light can touch every corner, where cities and devices never truly sleep, can humanity remember the night that once ruled our survival? In a world illuminated around the clock, something subtle yet powerful has begun to shape human experience. The emotional weight of perpetual light. Cities that never sleep provide safety, convenience, and entertainment, but they also create a kind of invisible strain on the human mind. Urban areas like New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago showcase this paradox. Streets glow at all hours. Neon signs, LED billboards, and street lamps saturate neighborhoods with light. Traffic hums continuously. Even late-night diners remain brightly lit, offering food and company for those who never sleep. The city is alive, but so is the stress. Sleep disorders have become increasingly common. Insomnia, restless sleep, and delayed sleep phase syndrome are now widespread in urban populations. The constant glow from phones, screens, and ambient light delays melatonin production. For humans, this is not a minor inconvenience. It disrupts the rhythm that has governed our bodies for tens of thousands of years. Beyond the physical, there is a psychological effect. Endless light creates a sense of urgency, as if time never pauses. People feel compelled to work, to scroll, to watch, to participate, even when their bodies crave rest. The boundary between day and night blurs, leaving the mind in a state of perpetual alertness. Many report feelings of anxiety, fatigue, and subtle unease, an invisible cost of conquering darkness. The cultural impact is equally profound. Once, nighttime carried meaning. In medieval towns and early colonial America, darkness signaled retreat, reflection, and community. Candlelight and hearths encouraged conversation, storytelling, and contemplation. Today, the artificial glow has replaced these rituals with distraction. Silence and shadow are rare, and moments of introspection often require deliberate effort. Even urban architecture has adapted to this relentless brightness. Skyscrapers, apartment complexes, and commercial buildings are designed with lighting in mind. Facades shine at night, streetscapes glow, and public spaces are illuminated to maximize safety and aesthetics. Yet the very strategies meant to improve life contribute to an alienating atmosphere. The city is visible everywhere, but genuine darkness, the kind that once comforted and warned simultaneously, is vanishing. For many, nostalgia for darkness has become an emotional craving. People seek quiet, dimly lit spaces, retreats to rural areas, or vacations far from the city glow. Stargazing trips, forest cabins, and camping under moonlight have surged in popularity. Observatories and dark sky preserves attract not just astronomers, but anyone longing to reconnect with the night. Seeing a sky full of stars evokes awe and wonder precisely because it is increasingly rare. The loss of night also deepens urban alienation. Humans evolved in natural cycles of light and dark, with cues for rest, activity, and socialization embedded in the daily transition. Perpetual illumination removes these cues, and with them, a sense of connection to the natural world. Studies suggest that people who live under constant light conditions experience subtle cognitive and emotional changes, including reduced attention span, increased stress, and feelings of isolation. Digital life amplifies these effects. Phones, tablets, and computers provide a continuous stream of information, entertainment, and social connection. But they also emit light directly into our eyes during hours our ancestors would have spent resting. Even the bedroom, a space once dedicated to quiet and sleep, becomes an arena of activity. Sleep becomes optional, delayed, and often shallow. Despite these challenges, humanity has developed coping mechanisms. Mindfulness practices, meditation, and evening rituals aim to recreate ancient patterns. Candlelit dinners, dim lighting, and scheduled digital sunsets help reintroduce shadow into daily life. Parents deliberately limit children's screen time to preserve natural sleep cycles. Cities experiment with warmer streetlight colors to reduce blue light exposure. In essence, humans are negotiating with night once more. The relationship is no longer dictated by necessity or survival. It is now a conscious choice. We decide when to embrace darkness and when to flood the world with light. But even in modern comfort, the pull of ancient rhythms remains strong. Our biology remembers the night that shaped our species, even when our cities deny it. The emotional consequences are striking. People describe a yearning for night that is almost physical, a deep-seated need to experience the quiet, the shadow, the vastness of the unlit world. Darkness becomes symbolic, a refuge, a reset, a reminder of limits beyond which technology cannot reach. Some argue that this longing explains trends like digital detox retreats, off-grid living, and urban lights-out movements. Others suggest that it fuels environmental awareness, as humans seek to preserve the night sky and minimize light pollution. In every case, the craving for darkness is not nostalgia. It is an echo of survival, memory, and biology intertwined. Ultimately, the story of night in America is not just one of light conquering darkness. It is a story of adaptation, tension, and longing. Humans have mastered the night physically, but emotionally, night continues to hold sway. We can illuminate every corner of the world, yet the mind and body remember the quiet power of darkness. Darkness has always been a canvas for human imagination. Long before electric light, night inspired stories, myths, and dreams. The endless hours of darkness demanded creativity, not only to survive but to make sense of the world. As society illuminated the night, the role of darkness in fueling imagination evolved, but it never disappeared. In early America, storytellers and poets leaned heavily on the night as a setting. Fireside tales of spirits, explorers and frontier adventurers relied on shadow to create tension. Darkness made the ordinary unfamiliar. It allowed imagination to roam freely, turning forests, rivers, and empty plains into places of wonder or fear. Authors like Washington Irving drew upon this atmosphere, creating narratives where night itself seemed alive. With the arrival of gaslight and early electric lighting, cities themselves became storytellers. Street lamps cast long shadows on cobblestone avenues. Theater stages glowed under artificial illumination, yet the contrast with surrounding darkness intensified suspense. Playwrights, musicians, and early filmmakers realized that light alone could not tell the story. Shadow was essential. Cinema revolutionized this interplay. In the early 20th century, silent films often relied on chiaroscuro lighting, deep shadows punctuated by bright highlights, to convey mood. Directors like F.W. Murnau, though European, influenced American filmmaking by demonstrating how night could evoke fear, mystery, and beauty. Hollywood quickly adopted these techniques. Night scenes became a staple of suspense, romance, and drama. The music industry also embraced the night. Jazz clubs in New Orleans, Chicago, and New York City thrived after sunset. Musicians drew inspiration from the evening, creating rhythms and melodies that echoed the intimacy, melancholy, or excitement of darkness. The night was not merely a backdrop, it shaped tone, tempo, and emotion. Literature continued this tradition. The noir novels of the 1930s and 1940s, set in perpetually dim urban landscapes, relied on shadows to convey moral ambiguity, danger, and tension. Crime, desire, and uncertainty were heightened when the streets were dark. Even as electric light illuminated cities, authors portrayed night as a character itself, something that could manipulate perception, influence choices, and inspire fear or wonder. Digital media and gaming have carried this legacy forward. Video games, virtual reality, and cinematic storytelling leverage darkness to create atmosphere, suspense, and immersion. Players navigate shadowed alleys, forests, and abandoned buildings, learning to anticipate danger or appreciate subtle beauty. In many ways, artificial light has expanded creative possibilities by giving contrast, but darkness remains the essential element for tension and depth. Interestingly, the scarcity of true darkness in modern cities makes it even more compelling. Urban dwellers who rarely see a night sky experience awe when exposed to unlit landscapes. Writers, musicians, and visual artists often seek these experiences as inspiration. Retreats into wilderness areas or remote locations are common for creative professionals needing the profound influence of night. Psychologically, darkness fosters introspection. With limited stimuli, the mind turns inward, allowing abstract thought, reflection, and imaginative leaps. Humans have historically solved problems, composed music, and envisioned futures under candlelight or moonlight. In an always lit environment, artificially imposed darkness, through blackout curtains or digital devices, is consciously used to recreate that mental state. Even in modern storytelling, darkness functions symbolically. In literature and film, night represents mystery, transformation, secrecy, and potential. Characters move through darkened spaces to face challenges, discover truths, or confront fears. Without darkness, the stakes of narrative tension diminish. Light alone cannot carry the same weight of emotion or symbolism. In essence, while electricity has redefined the night, darkness remains a necessary partner for human creativity. We illuminate the streets, our homes, and our screens, but artists, thinkers, and dreamers continue to seek shadows for inspiration. The night, once a survival challenge, has become a canvas for imagination, its scarcity only heightening its power. For modern humans, this paradox is striking. We have conquered darkness in the physical sense, yet we still crave it for mental, emotional, and creative reasons. The night that shaped early human cognition continues to shape art, literature, music, and digital media today. The conquest of night did more than illuminate streets and inspire creativity. It reshaped daily life itself. Human routines, sleep patterns, and productivity have all been transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. Before electricity, daily life revolved tightly around natural light. Farmers rose with the sun, workers paused at sunset, and entire communities rested during long winter nights. Meals, social gatherings, and religious practices were scheduled according to daylight hours. Night was a natural boundary, an organizing principle for human activity. Electric light disrupted that rhythm. Factories, offices, and entertainment venues extended their hours. By the early 20th century, many urban workers were putting in late-night shifts under artificial illumination. With gaslight and then electric light, night was no longer a time of rest but a time of opportunity. Production increased. Cities thrived. Human life became more flexible, but also more demanding. Sleep patterns shifted dramatically. People began consolidating what had once been segmented sleep into single blocks. The ancient practice of first and second sleep, where humans would rest, wake for an hour or two, then return to bed, gradually disappeared in industrialized societies. The human body was still wired for natural darkness, but society no longer adhered to it. By the mid-20th century, circadian disruption became widespread. Research revealed that artificial light delays melatonin production, meaning people stay alert later at night. Modern office workers, students, and shift employees often wake before sunrise after limited sleep. Sleep deprivation, once occasional, became a chronic problem. Global connectivity has intensified this effect. Digital communication allows people to work, watch, and interact at all hours. Online communities span time zones. Social media, streaming platforms, and 24-hour news cycles create a constant stream of information, encouraging individuals to remain active long after the sun has set. Night is no longer an end. It is a continuum. Productivity has also changed in unforeseen ways. While artificial light allows for longer work hours, it also masks natural fatigue cues. Extended wakefulness can increase output temporarily, but over time it leads to burnout, cognitive impairment, and health issues. The modern human is capable of continuous activity, but at a physiological cost. Daily schedules are increasingly decoupled from daylight. Morning routines are defined by alarm clocks, not sunrise. Evening routines are dictated by artificial light and digital interaction rather than sunset. Even meals are less tethered to the natural cycle. Late-night diners, delivery services, and 24-hour convenience stores allow activity at any hour. This decoupling affects health. Studies link chronic light exposure to insomnia, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular strain, and mental health issues. Nighttime light disrupts not only sleep but hormone regulation, digestion, and emotional balance. The body struggles to reconcile ancient biological rhythms with the demands of a 24-hour world. Yet for all the challenges, society has adapted. Urban infrastructure, public transportation, healthcare, and entertainment operate seamlessly around the clock. Night shifts are common in hospitals, factories, and emergency services. Cities run at all hours, with the illusion that darkness no longer exists as a constraint. Still, there is a growing awareness of the hidden cost. Sleep specialists emphasize the importance of dimming lights in the evening. Wellness programs promote digital detoxes. Workplaces implement flexible schedules to accommodate natural circadian rhythms. Communities advocate for light pollution reduction. Humanity is learning to negotiate with night once more, but this time intentionally. In short, modern life has stretched the boundaries of human activity. Night is no longer a passive period. It is actively shaped by technology, culture, and choice. Sleep is no longer solely a biological necessity. It is a carefully managed practice. Productivity and social interaction have been extended beyond natural limits, for better or worse. The conquest of darkness has been a double-edged sword. It has provided unprecedented freedom, creativity, and growth, but at the cost of disrupting fundamental human rhythms. Every aspect of daily life, work, play, rest, and reflection, now exists within a framework that balances artificial illumination with biological needs. The story of night in human history is a story of evolution, adaptation, and transformation. From our earliest ancestors, darkness was a challenge to survive, an ever-present force that shaped sleep, behavior, community, and culture. Humans learned to navigate it with fire, lamps, and rituals. Night dictated life. Survival depended on it. Then came electricity. The invention of the electric bulb, the rise of power grids, and the spread of illumination changed everything. Night was no longer a boundary. Streets, homes, theaters, and factories glowed after sunset. Cities thrived under artificial light. Productivity soared. Entertainment flourished. Human life expanded beyond natural limits. Yet conquering darkness brought consequences. Sleep patterns shifted. Circadian rhythms were disrupted. Mental health, biology, and the perception of time began to feel the strain. The natural signals that had guided humanity for millennia, sunrise and sunset, moonlight and starlight, were now optional, often absent. Urban dwellers rarely experienced true darkness, and even rural regions eventually joined the electric age. Throughout this transformation, darkness remained essential, if not always visible. It fueled imagination, creativity, and reflection. Writers, musicians, filmmakers, and artists drew inspiration from the night, from shadows and flickering firelight to neon-lit streets and deep urban alleys. Even in a world of constant illumination, darkness shaped human thought and expression. In the modern era, humanity faces a paradox. We control night as never before. Smart cities, digital screens, and artificial lighting allow activity around the clock. Night can be simulated, manipulated, or even erased. Yet our biology, psychology, and creativity still rely on darkness. We seek blackout curtains, off-grid retreats, dark sky preserves, and moments of quiet to reconnect with rhythms older than electricity itself. This tension defines contemporary life. Night is no longer solely natural. It is both conquered and chosen. Humans survive it effortlessly, yet we crave it consciously. The darkness that once demanded adaptation is now a luxury, a tool for health, imagination, and emotional balance. The journey from survival to mastery to balance illustrates a fundamental truth. Humans adapt, but they also remember. We have thrived in darkness, illuminated it, and now learn once more to respect its value. The night is no longer an enemy, nor is it merely conquered territory. It is a companion, a challenge, and a resource, one that continues to shape how we sleep, think, create, and live. As we move further into a world of artificial illumination, space exploration, and hyperconnected lifestyles, the story of night remains unfinished. Darkness may become ever rarer in urban landscapes, yet its psychological and biological importance persists. The human desire to experience true night, silent, shadowed, and star-filled, is as ancient as survival itself. In the end, the lesson is clear. We survived endless darkness, conquered it with light, and now must navigate a world where both darkness and illumination coexist. Mastery of night is not just about technology or productivity. It is about understanding, balance, and the rhythms that have guided humanity for tens of thousands of years. The night that shaped humans is still with us. It is up to each generation to decide how to live with it, whether to conquer it completely, embrace it deliberately, or find a balance between light and shadow that honors both our past and our future. The journey of night is the journey of humanity itself, from fear to control to understanding.